This is Clark the Knife, and this is another Hinderer Eklipse with a hollow grind. So this is one of Hinderer's recent releases. My immediate review just before this is my full review of the Eklipse, but Hinderer has started releasing the Eklipse as well as the XM18 and XM24 in a slicer grind that is hollow ground rather than flat ground. This is going to be a full review, but it will be an abbreviated full review. This is still a Hinderer Eklipse. If you want to see my full thoughts on the Eklipse, you can see the details in the previous review. I will still go through everything, but I'm going to sort of skim some of the stuff that I went through in a lot of detail in that previous review. But spoiler alert, this hollow grind makes a pretty big difference that, to me, changes the knife in a pretty material way. So let's start off with some specifications. This is still a Hinderer Eklipse. So the specifications are the exact same. This is a $425 knife made in the USA, still 3.5 inches. They did not reduce the blade stock. It's still 165 thousandths on the blade stock. The blade on this one, this is S45VN, so I should have changed that to S45VN. But, you know, you've got these Hinderers mostly using S45VN these days, which I am totally fine with. Well heat treated S45VN is a fantastic steel with a really good balance of edge retention, toughness, and corrosion resistance. It is, you know, if you don't want to go with a high edge retention steel like S90V or MaxMed or something like that, honestly, I like well heat treated S45VN just as well as MagnaCut. I find it is more enjoyable to sharpen, and as Spartan Knives has shown with their S45VN, you can get some pretty phenomenal edge retention out of well heat treated S45VN. So this is S45, totally okay with Hinderer's S45. 8.25 inches overall, 5.6 ounces, tri-way pivot system. None of that has changed by adding a hollow grind. Maybe, you know, they probably reduced like a 100th of an ounce because they've taken a little bit more steel off, but not a material difference. If we do size comparisons, it's the same knife as the Hinderer Eklipse. These new hollow ground versions are no different from any other Eklipse except that they have a hollow grind. Which means that it is also the same size as your XM18. Almost exactly the same size, with a very different design philosophy. Again, the Eklipse was meant to be more of a straighter knife, as I believe Rick Hinderer said it, where everything is more on a straight line from tip to tail, where the XM18 kind of has these curves at both ends. Functionally, with less jimping here, with this place for your thumb to sort of go down on this ramp here, a little bit more aggressive finger indexes here, a little bit more chamfering on your finger indexes, a little bit more jimping toward the butt here. It just ends up being a knife that is less, you know, not quite as insanely secure in the hand as the XM18, particularly because, you know, this flipper tab hooks around a little bit more than the flipper tab does on the Eklipse, but still, I mean, more secure in the hand than just about any other knife on the market, while being much more comfortable in the hand, much more comfortable to hold than the XM18. That's kind of what the Eklipse design philosophy was. And as I mentioned in my full Eklipse review, I think the Hinderer did an extremely good job of that. A couple other quick comparisons. Same size as your large Sabenta. Same size as your PM2, albeit it is a relatively heavier and sort of larger, thicker knife. Same length, maybe a little bit longer than your 940, while being obviously a much heavier and sort of more robust knife overall, and dwarfs something like your Benchmade Bug Out, or for that matter, your Spyderco Delica. And then if we compare it to, let's bring out a different one. Here is your AD20S, and you can see roughly the same size overall as your AD20S, albeit Hinderer runs their blade stock much thicker, 125 versus 165 thousandths here, but Demco runs their handles a little bit thicker than Hinderer does. So it's an Eclipse, and a lot of you have probably handled an Eclipse. You know, we've talked about the Eclipse before. It's the review that's immediately posted prior to this one. So what we're primarily going to talk about here is this hollow grind. Because what Hinderer has started to do, all of Hinderer's grinds have historically been flat grinds. Now for their slicer grind on the Eclipse and the XM18 and the XM24, and I have to assume on the Jurassic at some point, and maybe even on the Project X at some point, which will be an insanely slicey blade, I'm sure, they have started putting hollow grinds on here. Now, these debuted at, I think it was Blade Show, at one of the shows earlier this year. This is being recorded in 2024. And a lot of people commented that the hollow looked shallow. And it certainly does. You know, if I compare this to, I don't have any of sort of like, you know, the aggressive hollow grinds that somebody like Riot does or somebody like that, but you can't really see the hollow here. It's not like one of those like scooped out hollow grinds where you can see the, you know, like on the Yojimbo or something like that, where you can see, you know, that slope changing. Even when it reflects the light, it reflects light like a flat grind. But when you look down the ricasso, when you look sort of down the knife here, and when you feel it, when you pinch it, it feels much, much thinner behind the edge than this buoy. This buoy, I mean, honestly, like, and I don't have calipers to measure stuff behind the edge, but the buoy feels probably not that far from twice as thick behind the edge as the hollow ground version does, the hollow slicer grind does. And this slicer grind, as is typical, it's a little bit thicker back here. It's the way the grind is designed. There's a very shallow grind toward the base of the blade, which makes it a little thicker behind the edge, again, by design, for when you really want to get up and push. That gets, you know, this is a rising grind, and so here you've got that entire height of the blade to drop, and it's a, you know, not a short blade, and so even though 165 thousandths, that's thick stock to start from, when you got this far to drop with a hollow grind, it's not thin behind the edge. It's not going to be, actually, let me get a couple knives for comparison. So it's not going to be as thin behind the edge as something like my Mike Erie Atom. And again, this is an example. You can see the hollow grind a little bit more on this one, where you can just see it at that right at that transition. It looks like a little bit more like going off a cliff a little bit. You don't get that same look nearly as much here. You can see it a little bit if you really want to, but it's not even as deep a hollow as this one. This is a pretty shallow hollow. Honestly, the first thing that came to mind when I got this in hand was the Inkosi. Chris Reeve is very well known for doing shallow hollow grinds. They use these giant wheels for their hollow grinds, so that rather than being a steep hollow, it's a very gradual hollow. And honestly, if you didn't know better and you were looking at it just from this perspective, it almost looks like a flat grind, albeit a relatively aggressive one. But then when you look down the profile of the blade, especially down at the ricasso there, you can see how thin that gets behind the edge. Despite having, you know, I think these are like about 140 thousandths thick stock, because of the way Chris Reeve hollow grinds their knives, which again is a relatively shallow hollow, they can get super, super thin. Now, I'll talk in my Chris Reeve review. They do need some sharpening to get real edge performance out of them, but it's proof that a shallow hollow grind can get to a very nice thin edge. You don't need one of those crazy scooped out hollows. And the hollow grind on this slicer feels very similar. Now, it's not as thin behind the edge. It's not as sharp as your Inkosi, let alone a Sebenza. And a lot of that is because this is just starting from thicker stock, meaningfully thicker stock. And so this is still being held back by the fact that you've got 165,000 stock. If they had done this on 140,000 stock, if they had done this grind on 140,000 stock, this would be a legitimately slicey knife. I'm fairly confident about that. As it stands, they have taken the Eklipse, which, as I said in my previous review, is a fantastic knife. Ergonomically, design-wise, action-wise, everything about it is great, except for the fact that it just can't cut a damn thing. And they've made it so it can cut a damn thing. It's not going to be the sliciest knife in your collection, not by a long shot. But even with a Hinderer factory edge, and Hinderer's factory edges are notoriously fat, I've intentionally, much like the Fire Attack, not put my own edge on this because I want to get the slicing experience and the cutting experience that most people would have out of this knife. This will cut well enough. This hollow grind, which again, if you look down the ricasso there and you look right down at the base, it does get pretty thin right behind that edge. And if you compare that to, where'd my other Eklipse go? There we go. You can see, let me see if I can get them both in the shot. You can just see there how much thinner right behind the edge the hollow ground gets. And even though it's a shallow hollow, it makes a big difference. And by the way, that profile there was looking at the fattest part of the blade where that grind was most shallow. So when you're talking about this hollow grind, honestly think this is like a Chris Reeve hollow grind. This is a hollow grind. You know, Rick says that he kept it shallow to maintain the toughness of the blade so it didn't become fragile. That's fine, but honestly, I think he could have given a much better explanation, though Rick's probably a little too, I don't want to say egotistical, but I kind of want to say egotistical to do something like this. And I don't hear him, I mean, I haven't followed all his interviews and stuff like that, but I very rarely, I don't think I've ever heard him mention Chris Reeve knives by name specifically. Which you would think, given, you know, Hinderer and Chris Reeve and how central they are to the knife community, that they would mention each other regularly. They don't seem to. They're competitors, I get it. But anyway, this feels very much like a Chris Reeve hollow grind to me. And that, to me, is a very, very good thing. I love Chris Reeve's hollow grinds. Chris Reeve's hollow grinds give you a lot of performance while maintaining a lot of toughness. They sharpen up extremely well. They stay sharp for a very long time. I would expect the exact same sort of performance over time with sharpening out of this one. And I certainly got, you know, what I would expect from if you took a Chris Reeve-esque hollow grind and you put it on blade stock that was 15-20% thicker than your Inkosi or your Umnumzon. This, I get the level of performance I would expect, which, by the way, that is a major improvement over what you typically get from a 165,000 stock Hinderer. And I will almost say this hollow ground blade gives cutting performance that is almost as good as a skinny Hinderer. Almost, out of the box. It is not quite as good, and a lot of that is because, you know, the fact is you've still got 165,000 stock. So when you're pushing the blade through material, whether it's plant material, whether it's cardboard, whether it's drywall, carpet, whatever, you're still trying to wedge 165,000 through whatever material. And so it will start to bind up. It will start to be a problem, and it would be 15-20% less of a problem if they had just slimmed down the blade stock as well. But this cuts much better than any full thickness XM18, much better than any full thickness Eklipse that I have handled. Still not nearly as well as the Project X, but the Project X is a much larger knife with a much taller blade. And it's just, you know, it's a completely different category of knife, frankly. So yeah, this hollow grind is absolutely worth seeking out and absolutely makes a difference. And frankly, what the hollow grind does is it brings out the best of the Eklipse as a model. You've got and this is where I've got sort of the abbreviated portion of my previous Eclipse review. You've got extraordinary ergonomic lines here. This thumb ramp here with a little flat ramp where your thumb rests that goes down and sort of puts pressure for your thumb down onto the blade. You can counterbalance that with your index finger, which nests right behind this flipper tab that also functions as a guard. These two fingers pinch on the knife really easily. You can stab, you can poke, you can scrape, you can drag, whatever you want to do. This is a pretty basic drop point shape, albeit with this slicer grind. It gets a rising grind that's thick here, gets thinner as you get toward the tip. You can see it does it with this rising grind up to here. Your full thickness goes out to about here. They hide it with the swedge, and then it tapers toward the tip. Still pretty thick at the tip, but thinner than a lot of other Hinderers. And again, it's a cool looking grind. The overall shape is a standard drop point for the most part, with the tip a little bit above the pivot. It's a really nice, easy blade shape that works on everything well enough. It's hard to sort of talk about what tasks drop points are good and bad at, because your drop point is sort of your standard basic blade shape. It's your blade shape. If you want a blade that can do everything relatively well, you do a drop point and it will do everything relatively well, especially one that, has a tip a little bit above the pivot, just like this. Hinderer always does really, really nice stone washes. This one here is in their stone wash, really crisp, really even, really shows off all those transitions. This is, and as I often say about Hinderers, an unnecessarily beautiful blade. I love the way they do intersecting lines on their blade. This swoop here, the way it's cut all the way from the end of the jipping and just gradually swoops toward that transition there, and they cut the swedge out of it. And then this transition going up and meeting it, it's just pretty. This does work. It's a little bit stretched, but you can use this as a thumb ramp. You kind of rest right on that slope there, and you can really bear down on this blade if you want to. Again, with your hand sort of hammer gripping the rest of the handle, you can really squeeze this here. Feels extremely secure in the hand there. Everything on the handle, very nicely chamfered. They do a great job with their G10. Everything is, of course, as flush as you would want it to be. Not even the idea of blade play anywhere on a Hinderer. Your lock bar release is right there. This, which I haven't even had all that long, the D10's a little late, but it's a shake shut even without that much break-in. And this will get even more drop shutty over time. Flipper tab, less aggressive than your typical XM18 tab, while still having a little bit of hookiness. Typical Hinderer D10, which is a little bit on the harder side, fires out very nicely and consistently. And if you want to use the thumb studs instead, very nicely designed thumb studs. They've got all these little ridges. Get your thumb right under there, snap it out. They also act as blade stops to give you more resistance to those torsional forces. Handle design here, you've got your big front finger index, you've got a second finger index there, nice little chamfers there, and again, this is a straighter design, less hooked toward the butt than the XM18, with less jimping in all the places where your fingers land. Still, you've got these big fat chamfers on the edges on the lock side, slightly leaner chamfers on your G10 side. Really nice sort of swoopy texture on the G10 here. Your finger can skate over it if you want to, your thumb can, but if you bear down on it, it will give you grip just as much as sort of a Spyderco PO ply or something like that. It's a really nice texture. It both looks nice and is functional. Your lock side, as always, is a mess of hardware, but it is a very beautiful and industrial feeling mess of hardware, largely because everything just fits so nicely together, and you get to see more of that beautiful Hinderer stonewash. I will say, ergonomically overall, I already talked about this a little bit, but the Eclipse is just super, super secure in the hand. It's kind of got that feeling of like when you put your hands into Play-Doh or Silly Putty, where it feels like it fits between all the crevices of your fingers really, really nicely. It just kind of melts into your hand, and it is very, very secure without having any harsh edges or you just feeling the knife anywhere. It just feels like it's in your hand. It's nothing to worry about. One caveat that I will mention again here, I find that the ergonomics on the Eclipse are much, much better when it is mounted tip down like this. When you mount the clip tip up and you are gripping it, then the knife becomes fat down toward the butt, which honestly, it just ends up feeling a little bit like bulky down towards your pinky here, and where you want it to be thick, because in the Eclipse, your pointer finger and your thumb are doing most of the work. Frankly, I can hold the whole knife and feel like I have tons of control over it with just those two fingers. You want a little bit of extra thickness here. This stiff titanium clip gives that to you, and when it is mounted tip down, the ergonomics absolutely sing. This is one of the best ergonomic knives on the market. Honestly, I don't love the ergonomics all that much when that clip is mounted tip up. When it's down here, it feels like it needs some extra bulk up here, and it feels too bulky back there. So I would strongly recommend, if you get any clips, that you mount the clip like this, because I think the ergonomics will suit you better if you do that. I already talked about the cutting performance that this hollow grind brings. So with that said, we can get a little bit more quickly than usual to our scores. And what you'll see is that in a few very important ways, that hollow grind improves the Eclipse. So everything that was great, again, 10 scores, 5 knife enthusiast things, that's your fun factor, and 5 functional things, that's your function factor. Everything that was true about the standard Eclipse is still true here. Their blade designs are unnecessarily gorgeous. The way that they do all these intersecting lines, the swedges, the quality of the stonewash, the quality of the engraving, the quality of the jimping, the way they do the thumb studs, the flipper tab, even the plunge grind. You know, it's a very, very cool looking plunge grind. Hinderer consistently does their blades much prettier than they have to. They're just really, really nice looking blades. They're cool blades. They're not just functional, but they look great. And I really want to acknowledge them doing things like those swedges and that thumb ramp and all that sort of stuff, because they could have done their grind without them and it would have worked just as well, but it wouldn't have been nearly as cool. Solid A in blade design. Similarly, handle design. Mostly because the ergonomics are so great, but also because it's just a very unique handle shape. One thing that Rick does on this and the Jurassic is he does this little divot where he sort of wants you to drop down. So basically it feels like when you're holding it, your palm sort of feels like it's above your thumb and your thumb kind of drops down. This really makes it feel like when you push into, cardboard, push into, harder plant material, push into, harder tasks around the house, as well as, lighter EDC stuff. Having your thumb down, having a bit of, your sort of knuckle can rest on this little ramp here, pushing down into the blade feels really comfortable, and it feels hyper secure in your hand in this grip. It's a really, really nice design quirk. At the same time, on the Eclipse here, it's not as extreme as it is on the Jurassic, and so this knife still looks cool. The Jurassic kind of looks like a buck-toothed dork. It's not a cool looking knife in any regard. I've liked it before. I don't own a Jurassic right now, and I'm waiting for them to re-release it before I get one. But I think I'm going to wait for that. But anyway, I've liked the Jurassic in the past, but it's not a good looking knife. The Eclipse has managed to take that design sort of cue, make the whole design straighter, make it way more comfortable in the hand than the XM18 while still keeping those insanely good XM18 ergonomics. And in fact, in all but the hardest use cases, making it arguably even better because it's more comfortable. This is a knife that feels just as secure in the hand while being even more comfortable than the XM18. And the only time you would favor the XM18 is really in those actual EMT scenarios where you need every bit of those XM18 ergonomics with those more aggressive curves, more jimping, things like that. And then on top of that, with the handle design, things like these extra chamfers, things like, how nicely they do the hardware, how beautifully this lock side is finished. Much like the blade, everything on the handle is done unnecessarily well. So that's a solid A. Action. Modern Hinderer actions are an A. This is a very satisfying detent. It's a shake shut, even without that much break-in, and I know that it will become drop shut over time. Very secure flipper tab, very nice detent, fires out reliably, and then on top of that you've got the tri-way, so if you want a tighter action, a smoother action, you want that rubbery Teflon feel, you can get that, and that's just cool. Solid A in action. Fit and finish in Hinderer's 2024 is an A. Everything here is tight. Everything is flush. Hinderers always center very nicely out of the box. I mean, if you look at the tolerances on all this stuff, it's not quite at Chris Reeve levels, but it doesn't need to be, because this is as good as I would need fit and finish to be, particularly at the $425 price range. Again, I particularly love how nicely they finish the blade itself. Fit and finish on modern Hinderers is really, really good. You feel that in the detent, in the action. The fact that the tri-way system even works, that itself is a testament to the fit and finish. Solid A there. And the cool factor, it's a cool looking knife. And honestly, the Eklipse is probably a cooler looking knife than the XM18 is. This sort of straightened out design, and if you look at how much people liked the ZT-0393, how much people went crazy over that one, it just looks kind of badass. It's fun to flip, it's fun to carry. Everything is finished at a very high level, and it's got that Hinderer toughness. It doesn't sacrifice any of that. So I think it's overall a pretty cool knife. And then you go to the fact that you can upgrade this and you can make this an insanely cool knife. If you want to make this, if you want to get one that has, a battle black, and then you get a battle black scale on the front, and you get lime green hardware, you want to make your own ZT-0393, or you want to, get copper everything, or you want to, get all sorts of crazy stuff. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff and soup this up if you've got $300 burning in your pocket. You can make this an absurdly cool knife if you want to. It's very expensive, but you can do it. It's one of the cool things about Hinderer. There's a lot of cool things about Hinderer. Solid A there. So it's an A in fun factor, and modern Hinderers are very, very fun knives. I don't think there are many knives that are more fun at the $425 price range when you look at everything all put together. And frankly, I really like carrying Hinderers. They're some of the most fun knives to carry. I enjoy every time I get a reason to carry a Hinderer. They are probably more fun than most of the other stuff I have in my collection, certainly at this price range. And then we go over to function. Cutting performance, which was a C for the non-hollow grind Eklipse. The hollow grind brings it all the way up to a B. This hollow grind meaningfully improves cutting performance. This blade is still not a slicer. Don't get it twisted. This does not cut as well as your Nkosi. This does not cut as well as your Sabenza. This cuts a little bit worse than a skinny XM18 if you have one of those. And it's nowhere close to, a legitimately slicey knife. So don't think that this hollow grind makes it slicey. But this hollow grind turns it from being a poor cutter to being a good enough cutter. This Eklipse will do the cutting jobs you need it to. There are very few cutting tasks other than shaving grapes and stuff like that, maybe cutting paper towels, that it won't be able to do. And it's also sharp enough that you can start doing things like thinking about putting more aggressive edges on there and get some probably very strong cutting performance out of it. And because that cutting performance goes from a C to B, the utility also goes from a C plus to a flat B. It's a versatile blade shape. It's a versatile handle shape. Now, the problem is it's still a big, chunky knife that doesn't have a finger choil. And so this can still feel like a lot of knife for some smaller tasks, particularly because this blade is still so relatively thick toward the tip. Stuff like zip ties, stuff like, finer tasks where you really want to get in something, this still feels like a lot of knife. So, it's not going to be a replacement for your Delica, for, taking out needles and little stuff like that. It's not trying to be. But where the Eklipse with your standard flat grind was so difficult to cut with that it was frustrating to use for a lot of tasks, any task that you would reasonably use a knife of this size and weight for, it will do very well. These ergonomics, because of how sort of straight they are and less curved and less aggressive they are than the XM18, they are more comfortable to use for your lighter duty tasks than the XM18 is, which honestly the XM18 can often feel like a very big, chunky, aggressive knife when you're using it to, cut open an Amazon box or something like that. The Eklipse is more comfortable and so feels a little bit more suited for general use than the XM18 does. And at the same time, it can still go just as hard as an XM18 in all but the most extreme circumstances. So this ends up feeling more EDC friendly, much more EDC friendly than the Eklipse, more EDC friendly to me than the XM18, still not nearly to the extent that the Skinny is. I still do, just to be clear, I still do not like a full thickness hollow ground Hinderer nearly as much as I like a skinny Hinderer. I would love to see a skinny hollow ground Hinderer, but I don't think that's going to happen. I would rather have had a skinny Eklipse than a hollow ground Eklipse. But since I'm not getting a skinny Eklipse, this hollow ground Eklipse not only cuts better, but because it cuts better, it is much more useful than your full thickness standard flat ground Eklipse, so solid B in utility. Feel this is still an exceptional ergonomic knife. They have taken sort of, the general curves of the XM18, straightened the whole thing out, smoothed things out, and so they have ended up making a knife that feels very comfortable in the hand while still being extremely secure in the hand, whether you're strapping, you're dragging, you're pulling, you're cutting through something, slicing through cardboard, whatever you're doing, this knife will do it very, very well. It will feel very good in the hand while you are doing it. This is one of the better ergonomic knives on the market, probably one of the best ergonomic knives on the market. I would still like it a little bit thinner than this one. That's part of the reason that I prefer the Skinny as well. I do like the ergonomics when it's a bit thinner, but that's probably a function of my small hands as well, or my smaller hands. Either way, solid A for feel. Carry. It's still the exact same knife as the Eklipse, which got a C+ in carry. I'm giving this one a B-. I'm giving it that one step up because carry is a relative score. It is really how much performance am I getting for the weight in my pocket. The thing is, this is still a 5.6 ounce knife. It's still a relatively large knife. It's still, most importantly, maybe a relatively thick knife. Like it's a chunk. If I compare it to the Inkosi, which is itself, not a thin knife, you can see it's meaningfully thicker, it's meaningfully heavier, and the Inkosi is not a small knife by any means. This is a chunk in your pocket. You will feel it all day if you are carrying it. The difference is, when I had an Eklipse without a hollow grind, I felt like I was carrying just a boat anchor that wasn't going to do anything for me. This, at least, is going to give me some significant cutting performance for that weight. And so I'm willing to bear that 5.6 ounces a little bit more when it can actually cut than I was able to when it couldn't. So that hollow grind sort of unintuitively, but in my sense, I don't mind carrying this nearly as much when it's got that cutting performance, so I'm bumping that up to a B-. And then value, I pretty consistently rate Hinderers a B+ for value. $425 is a lot for a knife. There's no getting around that. But when you look at the level of fit and finish, the level of design, the level of quality that you are getting here, and you get the fact that it's made in the USA, I have no issue with $425, and I think that if you are used to playing in this space, it is totally justified. They do a lot of things that are unnecessarily good, unnecessarily pretty, unnecessarily well finished, and honestly, with everybody else's prices going up, and frankly with stuff from Riot and we regularly going to the $400 mark right now, Hinderers just feel more substantial to me. They feel better to me. They feel nicer. The tolerances might not be as razor tight, but it's stupid and it's completely unfalsifiable. But every Wii and Riot I've handled, with maybe the exception of Riot's internal designs like the K2, all those designer-made Riots and Wiis, they feel soulless. This still feels like it has a soul. This still feels like somebody gave a damn about something other than a paycheck when they made it. And you consider that, I do put value on stuff made in the USA. That is worth something to me. $425, totally justifiable for Hinderer to charge that. You may not be somebody who needs a $425 knife. I totally get it. This is a luxury good, and you are not getting that much performance benefit over what you could feasibly get at $225, $250 with a few other knives out there. But it's not that you're not getting anything for that. You're getting a level of fit and finish and a level of tightness, and you are getting some incremental performance and some incremental design thought that is absolutely there, and you do feel and you do see. B+ in value. That brings the function up to a B+, and that makes this an A knife overall. And that's really the story of the hollow grind. That one change, that one grind, which again, they didn't even go my preferred route and make the whole thing skinny. They just made the grind hollow. While keeping everything else the same, changes the way this whole knife feels, because it goes from a knife that is awesome in so many ways, but held back by its cutting performance, to one that is just awesome and feels like a solid A knife. This feels like a highly recommendable knife. This feels like a highly useful knife. This feels like a great knife. And honestly, I am very excited for Hinderer to start using these hollow grinds. And I'm looking forward to them getting these hollow grinds. They have said that they're only putting them on the slicer grind, which is fine. You know, the slicer grind is great. It's been one of my preferred Hinderer grinds for a while. You know, I do really like the way the buoy looks, but it doesn't cut that well. I like the sheep's foot, I like the Wharncliffe, but the slicer is totally fine. And the hollow grind meaningfully improves cutting performance, and so improves the whole knife as a result. I would still love to see a skinny Eclipse at some point, but I don't think that's going to happen. So this happens to be, to me, the best version of the Eclipse that you can buy right now. And the Eclipse is a really good Hinderer, and honestly, these days, I think a lot of people might like the Eclipse better than the XM18. It's not quite as classic. It's not that, you know, signature Hinderer quite the way the Eclipse is, but for most people doing everyday sorts of tasks, I think you're going to really like the ergonomics of the Eclipse. And with this hollow grind to improve that cutting performance, it's going to make it a lot better for you, for most people and most use cases. It's still, by no means, my favorite Hinderer. In fact, it is still third in line for my favorite Hinderer. The skinny XM18 is still absolutely and actually far and away my favorite Hinderer, and still the performance they get out of this hollow grind is nowhere near the cutting performance that they got out of the Project X with that big, tall blade grind that they put on that. But it has fallen into the third slot, or at least it's fighting for the third slot with the Fire Tack, which they smartly put at 140,000 blade stock. So, big improvement, highly recommended, and honestly, if you already like the Eclipse and you've either tried it before and didn't like it because the cutting performance was so poor, or frankly, even if you've got an Eclipse and you're wondering, is it worth the upgrade to get the hollow grind? I would say yes. I would say that this hollow grind makes it a meaningfully better knife. And if you've got the opportunity to offload your existing Eclipse and basically upgrade to one of these with the hollow grind, I would say that it is absolutely worth it, and you are going to get a much better knife as a result. So those are my thoughts on the Hinderer Eklipse Hollow Ground and on the worth of that hollow grind specifically. I was going to do a video about, is the hollow grind better? But frankly, I think I covered all of that in this video, so I don't need to do another one. Hope you found that entertaining or useful or a bit of both. Hope you found it, above all, a good use of your time. Thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts on the hollow ground Eclipse or the Eclipse in general. Your experience with it, whether you had the same experience that I did or not. Let me know any other knives you'd like me to review down in the comments. Hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been Clark the Knife. Bye-bye.